thank you for the generous offer to come back and be here twice in 1 year. I was just thinking as you were speaking, if I had known I was coming back, I would have said something really clever at the end of my remarks last time, like, I'll be back. But I didn't know. And so it's just a great surprise to be invited back and to talk about an entirely different topic. Just, you know, an update for you. For those of you who were here when I spoke about South Sudan and our school building effort in South Sudan and had a former lost boy of Sudan as our guest speaker, who was here for that, just so I'll know? Okay, great. That's really great. So then, for those of you who were here and those of you who weren't here for that, I owe you a little update, and perhaps I can give the update in such a way that we can bring everybody up to speed. So we shared that South Sudan is the newest country in the world as of July 2011. And it is the newest country in the world following 5 years of an enforced comprehensive peace agreement, which led up to the ability of South Sudan to vote in a referendum and become the newest country in the world. But that 5 years of enforced comprehensive peace agreement was preceded by almost 50 years of civil war. So, in fact, 50 years of civil war in 2 significant civil wars that are now deemed the bloodiest civil war in Africa's history, where 2 million people died and there were 2 million refugees in a country, the combined country at the time, with a population of somewhere on the order of about 12 to 14 million people, depending on who's counting. So it was really magnificent to share with such an internationally minded Rotary group that this was going on and that our objective was to build a model permanent primary school in a particular area of South Sudan that has been highly contested over many years, and to be able to see the impact of doing that. So I'm happy to report that in addition to going on the Rotary Peace Fellowship, I went to South Sudan at the end of November. I saw the near completion of the first permanent primary school that we were building. They are putting the finishing touches on it even as we speak, but I was able to really see the impact, and Rotarians would know this better than almost any group in the world. What happens when you actually extend your hand in a place that has been marginalized and conflicted for a very long time and try to create a solid foundation for peace in the future? And in fact, there's plenty of data that shows that when you do that in places that are post-conflict, you actually create a more stable foundation to prevent the possibility, and there's always a strong possibility, that a country will revert to war. So it was magnificent to go and see that school. It was magnificent to meet the people, to see the impact of school, latrines, textbooks, and so on. But it took my breath away. I was sort of speechless. I met with the Director General of Education for the state where we're doing a building. And he's a South Sudanese who had lived in the United States for 17 years, and he's just gone back to help. And he said, oh, right. You know, when the peace agreement was signed, there were no schools in Unity State, none. And we now have 400. But 400 means about 100 of them are legitimate permanent primary schools. The others may be learning spaces under trees. They may be half-formed mud huts that erode each year with the rain. But, you know, still significant progress with regard to creating an environment of education. And then we were talking to him, and he said something. I said, are you indicating to me that that permanent primary school that we're just finishing is the first permanent primary school started and completed in this entire state of about 3 million people since independence? And he thought, and he said, oh, yeah, I guess I would have to say that. Your school is the first permanent primary school that was started and completed since independence for South Sudan in this state. And it took my breath away for the following reason. It is completely illogical that that is the way the world operates. It's illogical because there is plenty of evidence that shows the relationship between basic education, literacy, stabilizing an environment, creating an environment for peace. And we all know it, the evidence is there, and the last thing that ever gets tackled in post-conflict situations is education. So I just want to say hats off to Rotary, because you are that rare organization that worldwide understands the impact of doing good projects in the world. And I think your example of the gentleman, and I always mispronounce it, it's Cusco, right?
Well, he's Alto Cabo, but Cusco is where he's having the operation.
You know, it's just a great example of what the spirit of Rotary is. You know, you understand those connections and you work hard to make those connections. So, all right, well, so that, believe it or not, is just a little introduction. What I promised Rhett and Richard I would talk about today is peace. And I said I would do it in 3 ways. I said I would share what I learned on my Rotary Peace Fellowship, thank you, courtesy of generous Rotarians. But also, what did I bring back as my to-dos? And how might that inform whatever efforts your peace committee and you may be pursuing with regard to making this world a better place to live. So many people, even within Rotary, actually don't understand how the Rotary Peace Fellowship program works. And that's a missing as far as I'm concerned, because if generous Rotarians have funded it, we really owe it to you to explain what are we up to when you send us on a fellowship and what's the impact? Or as a businessman would say, what's the ROI? What's the return on investment? So, so first things first, there are now about 700 Rotary Peace Fellows on the planet. About 4, depending on who's giving you the numbers, about 500 of them have gone through the program that I went through at beautifully pronounced Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok. Perfect. And about 200 have gone through the formal master's program at 5 other universities. It's actually 6 other universities, but Duke and UNC do their program together. If you're a Rotary Peace Fellow, you can't do the fellowship in your own country. You have to travel. So for instance, I couldn't do the fellowship in the US. I had to go abroad. And people always laugh. When you hear about my educational background, Rotarians say the last thing she needed is another master's. So I went on the professional development program, which lasts for about 3 months. I was in a cohort of 22 people from various countries, various professions, and really sort of 24/7, you are exploring how do you actually create peace in the world. So you get amazing presentations from scholars. We were on 2 extended field visits to the northern border with Burma, which of course is a very hot topic these days, with Burma opening up in a whole new way. But these refugee camps that have existed for 20 years right across the border in Thailand, and very interesting, the Thai government would never call those camps refugee camps. Okay, there's a whole set of political issues around what gets labeled a refugee camp or a displacement center or just a place some people happen to live across the border. So there's that, but we also went to Cambodia and of course the infamous killing fields, and went out into the rural villages to see some projects actually funded by Rotary clubs in the US who have come together to support these projects out in rural Cambodia. So it was very informative. So it's 24/7, you're there for 3 months. It's really, and you should be glad about this, a relentless sort of nonstop program. But you were chosen for this program on the assumption that because of what you do in life, and I loved what Feroz said when I was chosen. He said, we're choosing you because you're gonna be like a sleeper agent for peace. I said, Feroz, what do you mean a sleeper agent for peace? He said, because you had this nonprofit called Mothering Across Continents, and you're in all these countries, and it happens to be that many of your projects are in post-conflict societies, you do your work, you are a sleeper agent for peace. Okay, because you're doing these projects, and ipso facto, if you're informed with these peace principles, you will do your work in a more conscientious way around being a peace builder. Okay, and I can now say, I now understand what he meant. So that's an important point. Another point is, I could never give you all the content of the Peace Fellowship program, but I was saying earlier to the team that's working on conflict resolution, it's ironic that Rotary funds these programs, this program called the Rotary Peace Fellowship, and yet formally you don't have access to the content yourself. And it's particularly ironic in the year of Peace Through Service. So I feel like I should give you the headlines on what I learned, so you'll have access to that too. So point number 1, the world has actually never been more peaceful. There have never been fewer interstate wars on this planet. So fewer wars between countries and across borders. There have never been more democratic states on the planet. There have never been more people getting access to health, education, clean water, etc. It's such great news. And as a consequence of conflict, war on this planet, 2 billion of the 7 billion people on this planet still live in the most dire circumstances, where they don't have access to education, they don't have access to water, they don't have access to shelter, they don't have access to the hopes and dreams that we do. Point number 2, if you live in a Western, democratized country that values civil society transparency, you are much more likely to be in a stable environment where you don't experience war within your own borders. Ooh, point number 3, even though it's more peaceful across borders, on any given day on the planet, there are 345 intra-state conflicts underway, significant ones. And it can be in the south of Thailand, it can be quite commonly in Southeast Asia or Africa, but there are other hotspots in the world, and so we really think hotspots. And indeed, if you look at certain places in our own country, often in major urban centers, and you look at the statistics, it can look an awful lot like hotspots around the globe. Okay? And then I guess my last point, no, 2 last points. Scholars think that the amount of energy and money spent on preparing for war and learning how to prepare for war versus the energy and money spent on learning to prepare for peace is about a 98% to 2% ratio. So in other words, all of our energies are over here. There is limited energy put on learning the discipline of peace. Okay? Now, Einstein, a 15-year-old boy told me while I was in Vermont, well, you know what Einstein said? E equals MC squared? And he said, no, Einstein said, and I'll only have to paraphrase it, it is impossible to simultaneously prepare for war and prepare for peace. So that's an interesting sort of thing to think about, right? And if the ratio is 98% and 2%, then what does it tell us about the energy and money and thinking of a team like this and how that could be applied to causing this to be a more peaceful world? So the last point from my Rotary Peace Fellowship that you might really appreciate as Rotarians is scholars, and particularly a Norwegian scholar named Johan Galtung, talk about negative peace and positive peace. For much of the last 30 years, we have focused on negative peace, which means the cessation of violence and conflict, direct violence. So helping countries stop being armed, helping countries put down their weapons, helping countries demobilize child soldiers. But there's a phenomenon called positive peace. And positive peace is anything you do to lay a foundation to reduce marginalization of any group or groups of people. So, if you work on education, I mean, if you look at the Rotary sort of framework, you know, of the kinds of projects Rotary does, it is the practice of positive peace. It's education, maternal and child health, hygiene, caring for the environment. You have about 8 of them. And they look like the principles of positive peace. And as one of the scholars said to us on the last day of our classes, anytime you are working on the positive aspects of peace to reduce some group of people feeling marginalized, you are laying the foundation so we can work on the big, hard questions of peace, which we all think of as war and open conflict. So that is the Rotary Peace Fellowship in a nutshell. You've just been to 3 months of class. But what I was asked in coming here was, well, now what? You know, what will I do with it, and what can I share with you that could be useful as you think about your own activities? And indeed, when you are given a Rotary Peace Fellowship, at least the program I was on, you have to identify an action plan. You have to say, this is the project that I'll be pursuing. So one thing I would like to do is thank you from the bottom of my heart. Because before I went on this fellowship,
I sort of understood that doing the projects at the organization I had is about peace. And in fact, our moniker is Education, Health, Nutrition, Joy, Peace. So I sort of understood that I was a peace warrior, but only because of the discipline of this program that you have sent 700 people on, can I now say, right, building schools in South Sudan is a peace project. I get it, and as hard as it is, and as long as it takes, and all the obstacles you face, it is not a problem. And I can speak with integrity and say, these are projects that have to be done on the planet. They're peace projects. I now know that, thanks to Rotary. So thank you for making the case for me. So that's one. But also, while I was in Thailand, and let me just check time here. Okay, we're good. While I was in Thailand, a number of us started saying, well, you know, gee, Rotary has funded these peace fellowships, and this is the year of peace through service. And Rotary is one of 2 NGOs in this world that are recognized by the United Nations. And Rotary has, and I actually used to know the slide by heart, I'm sorry I don't know it, but you know, a bazillion clubs and a bazillion Interact members and a bazillion this and a bazillion that. But as you say, 2% of your members are under the age of 30. And you know how to do projects, and you've done polio so well, and you're doing all these other projects. Would Rotarians ever think about peace being their next big platform? When we were curious. But what I saw also was how ironic, what a shame if we have been funded to go on these peace fellowships and we can't make this knowledge accessible to Rotarians, because technically you can't go on the fellowships, right? So while I was in Thailand, the series of emails started going around about this group of Rotarians in Vermont who were thinking about doing a youth peace education project. And you know how that goes. You know, the email chain gets longer and longer and longer, and people are laying out frameworks, and people are speculating about the future, and there's no content. As in, there was no program to do. It was an aspiration, but what would this peace education project actually look like? So the executive director of the program said, well, I don't know, Patricia, you're going back to the States. Would you want to help them out in any way? Oh, okay, well, let me check it out, And what I saw was, oh my goodness, peace education is a topic that youth care about. Oh my goodness, Rotary is this amazing network, this amazing platform with all of these people with business skills, project management skills. You're a great humanitarian organization. Oh my gosh, intergenerational idea creation is, you know, a hot topic, you know, a buzz of our times. Okay, all right. And there really isn't a youth peace education project that has a blessing or imprimatur within Rotary. So let's pilot it. All right, I'll come to Vermont and we'll pilot this peace education program. So we have launched it. That's what I did when I was in Vermont last week. It will last the entire semester, and I won't go into the construct of it. I need the details. But it was so magnificent to work with youth and let them, the next generation, the new generation that Rotary talks about, work through, well, what is this Global Peace Index, and what does it mean that the US is number 88 on a list of 158? What does it mean that you're in Vermont, and on the US Peace Index, you're number 3, because you're about the safest place on the planet? What does that mean? And what do you want to do with it? But the most magnificent part was that we have built Rotary mentors into the program. So the youth and the Rotary mentors get access to the same information. They went through the same immersion workshop. But then the Rotary mentors, with all their wisdom and all their skills, are going to be the guides to the students throughout the program. We teach content, they mentor. And there's a gentleman in the program who's a mentor, who has a long military and business history, a long education history in Washington, D.C. And he came and said, and with almost tears in his eyes, he said, I have seen the impact of war. I have had young men, I've held them in my arms. And to give me the chance to help guide youth and their thinking about when is war an instrument that becomes necessary and appropriate? And what are the other things that you do to create a greater sense of humanity on the planet in general? It's a gift for me to have that experience with these students. So it's been launched. I was a little flustered because I had to do an interview about it this morning in the newspaper in Vermont. I thought, it's just too early, it's just too early. But it went well enough that the Vermont Rotarians are saying, so what if other Rotary clubs want to get engaged in youth peace education? You know, wouldn't that be magnificent? Gee, how would that happen? And that's where we are. So that's my story of thanking you, sharing the Rotary Peace Fellowship and the time I have, telling you what I'm up to next. And if we have a few minutes, I'm happy to take questions. If not, I understand.
We've got at least 5 minutes.
Yes, John.
I have maybe 2 questions. One is you talked about there's never been a time where more people are getting health care, it's more peaceful, less people, that type of thing. Is that partially because naturally more people are on the earth, so by just numbers it's less, or is it also percentage less? Do you see what my question is?
I do. I can't tell you about exact percentages, and certainly your question about more people on the earth is relevant. But I think you can look at real life examples to sort of answer this question. Like you go to Rwanda today, Rwanda doesn't look like what Rwanda looked like when it was going through a period of genocide. Even Cambodia, which has its own issues right now in terms of the government and transitioning to true democracy and all that. What people have access to there and the sense of prosperity and action and movement just doesn't look like it used to. So, and I'm very quick to underline, and still 2 billion people on the planet live in the most extreme circumstances, including in some of our cities.
So I vote for our club to be part of this pilot project in Vermont, so that's a different thing. Okay, so here's my big pondering question. Last week, our speaker was General Handy, who had been involved with, do you know General Handy?
I know of him.
Okay, and many years in the military, very pro-military, and talking about is it the 9.8% cuts that the national government is proposing that could happen across the board. And he's saying if we do that, we're going to be in dire straits. Now, what I'm thinking in my brain, the 2%, 98%, 2% focus on peace, 98% focus on war. What type of dialogues do you and Peace Fellows and that group of people have with the General Handies, and where do you come together? In 2 minutes or less.
Yeah. So it's a really good question. I want to answer the question in an unexpected way. So I have come to believe in what I call the mosaic model. And in fact, I'll be speaking about it next week at TEDx Charlotte. And the premise of the mosaic model is we live in an age where with the use of technology, with lines being blurred between public sector, private sector, for-profit, non-profit, what's military, what's humanitarian, that the answer really lies in set up big questions, and we always put them in a heart, set up big questions and bring a lot of relevant players together to work the project or work the problem. And so all I can say, I'll say it this way, I think if we change our mindset and look at problems and how you can bring as many relevant players to a specific problem as possible, be they military, be they business, be they for-profit, be they non-profit, be they organizations like mine, the more likely you are to see that shift from the 98.2% shift the other way. Yes, sir.
Would it not be a good idea to try to get this curriculum in public schools? It would not only help moral peace, but it would help the conflict within the schools.
Well, it's such a great question, and I asked the teenagers last week. We had them fill out a survey, as well as the mentors, about their knowledge, connection, action, and skills related to peace. And what the mentors and the students said was, no, we don't talk about these topics in school. No, we haven't had a chance to talk about them in our community, our faith communities. No, I've never delivered a presentation about this. No, I don't have conversations with my family about this. So I can imagine how it could be so relevant in schools, absolutely. And I think what's brilliant though about the Vermont Rotarians and their pilot is that we found a school to support and sponsor the pilot, But I think this educational process could take place in so many different venues. And in fact, that's the beauty of the Rotary system, I think. You know, you have a vast networking platform where education can be brought in, you know, as a service to formal institutions, but also outside formal institutions. So, yes, yes, and yes, and yes.
Patricia,
Uh-huh.
could you segue off that question? Don't you have a plan for some Charlotte schools at the middle school level?
Well, we have a project going with 16 schools now, my organization, Mother and Cross Continents. It is not a peace program per se, it's called the Global Class. And the premise of the Global Class is that when you have students, particularly high school students, learning about a multitude of global issues that affect them even in their own backyard, that they can become envoys, they can become messengers, they can be project leaders. And so we now, 16 schools are involved, as of about 2 weeks ago officially, in this project called the Anyone Can Project. And you'll be hearing a lot about it, but the culmination of the Anyone Can Project is there will be an art installation at the CPC Sensoria Festival in April of hundreds of t-shirts created by students as an expression of issues they have learned and come to care about, and they think we should all be tackling. And one of them is peace and conflict resolution. So it's kind of peace in the door that way. Yeah.
So Patricia, as I heard you speak, I couldn't help but think that in today, we pretty much have to morph our ideas about traditional war and, you know, incorporate ideas about cyber war or access to, you know, capital on a global level, and how all of those sorts of different types of, you know, war, if you will, help to marginalize people on a very local and intimate level. I just wanted to make that comment and invite you to, you know, share your thoughts.
All right, so that's a great question to close on, because I'll leave you with one other thing from the Rotary Peace Fellowship training that you wouldn't otherwise have access to. So this Johann Galtung that I mentioned gives us a very interesting definition and construct for peace, or anti-violence. And he creates it in a triangle. You know, all of life these days takes place in a triangle. So, direct violence. How do you reduce and minimize direct violence and conflict, armed conflict? Structural violence. How do you address issues that lead to marginalization? Education, hygiene, health, and so on. Cultural violence. How do you create bonds between people? How do you create levels of tolerance that go beyond tolerance to appreciation, empathy, embracing, to the extent that, as he says, I'll know that we've created an environment for peace when your joy is my joy, your suffering is my suffering, and vice versa. Did I do that 4 times? I think I multiplied it. But so to your point, the triangle, that these are the various aspects of peace. And ultimately, the cultural piece and this deep empathy is sort of the icing on the cake. Thank you.
Wow.